Okay. Now I'm ready when you're
Yeah, all the way. I mean, it's a bad cross.
All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's meeting.
I agree.
I'm going to start with introductions. And my name is Brian Tapscott from Somersworth.
Marilyn Barton with Strafford Regional Planning Commission.
John Martin from Northwood.
Marcia Gassis from Barrington.
Cynthia Copeland with Strafford Regional.
I'm Shanna Sylvia from Strafford Regional.
Craig Jones, Strafford Regional. Matt Sullivan with Strafford Regional.
Ed Commode, Brookfield.
Bob Jaffin, Rochester.
Sandy Keynes, Rochester.
Bill Connor, Somersworth.
Tony McManus, Dover.
Tom Crosby, Mabry.
Okay, thank you. I want to start off with our presentation this evening, the New Hampshire Estuaries and Oyster Restoration Program. And I'd like to introduce Ray Koniski, PhD Marine Conservation Ecologist from the Nature Conservancy of New Hampshire. And Ray, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. I think I'll just stand here if this works. Hopefully it will. Thank you for the commission and for Cynthia for inviting me in for this evening. Let me ask this, about, what are we looking at, 15, 20 minutes, something like that, or looks pretty good? Okay. Well, let's talk about oysters. There's a lot of interest in restoring oysters into our estuary here in New Hampshire and in Great Bay, and I'll talk a bit about that with the Nature Conservancy. I work together very closely with the University of New Hampshire, and we have other partners as well. The reason we're so interested in oysters is not because they taste good, which they do, but it's because they do a lot of great things for the estuary. And in particular, you may be hearing a lot about, and I know you're hearing a lot about, nitrogen and nutrients. And nutrients, that we have elevated levels, too many in the system. Well, oysters love that. They eat that right up. It's food for them. So they are able to tolerate the water conditions as they exist in Great Bay, whereas other habitats like eelgrass, the seagrasses in the system, are having a real hard time. But we find around oysters, eelgrass is doing pretty well because oysters are big-time filterers. They're pumps. And an adult oyster will pump 20 gallons of water a day. So it's a lot of filtration in the system and a lot of benefits of removing these nutrients, of which we have too many, and clearing the water. So they help eelgrass to improve the clarity. And oyster reefs, if anyone has ever done any fishing, people know that that's a place that structure is places that fish want to be. So it's an excellent habitat for fish as well, as is eelgrass. So these things all work together. We look at the system and it's got issues in terms of nitrogen loading, but the water quality is good enough for oysters. So our focus has been on getting nitrogen out of the system in the places where it needs it the most, places where there's lots of food, and that is the Great Bay Estuary. So we start with this map of the system. Hopefully you're familiar with this. And let's see, there's a pointer on here. Yeah, okay, good. So there's a lot going on this map, but we've done a lot of work in looking at the system and trying to figure out what was there, so we try to get to where we want to be. So what you see here are a few things. The big green areas are eelgrass, and these hatched areas are places that there was eelgrass. So it used to be a real corridor in through the rivers, down into the bay. And if you know a bit about how fish reproduce, a lot of these are migratory fish. They reproduce up in the rivers. They come back out, and these little fingerlings would be able to follow these trails out in and out of the estuary for protection. That's gone now. The eelgrass and the river mouths are gone because it's too turbid, too murky most of the time. Eelgrass does reside here in the Great Bay. Now, oysters are another story. If you look at the yellow, we mapped close to 1,000 acres of oysters, and that was as recently as 1970, so only 40 plus years ago. There were about 1,000 acres of oyster in the system. Now we have much less than that, on the order of 80 or so, 85. And that's with these oranges. So there's some existing oyster reefs in orange. We've been working in places to recover these, and the places that we're working are on the map here. So we worked a little bit in the Bellamy, we worked in the Oyster River, and I'll show you how we do this. And then in Newmarket, and last year down in Swampscott. And we're working in places where there are existing oyster reefs there. So there's some live animals there. We work around that. These places are degraded though. They get silted in. And what we do is we build out around those areas. So there's live animals there. We put shell in the water, creates a place for oysters to settle and live, and then we seed on top of them. By working in the river mouths, we get a lot of advantages. First of all, we're right usually just downstream of wastewater outfalls. So there's a lot of food in the water, and it's the best place for the surfaces. Second is they can't be harvested, and it's close to harvest. So it's it's beneficial to the system, and no one's going to take them out. It's also good places. They like brackish water for a few reasons. One of the big reasons that these oysters were lost was because of diseases. These diseases came up from Chesapeake Bay. Those diseases really took a big hit on the system, and they actually don't do very well in brackish water. It's more full strength salinity water. So these oysters that exist have some resistance to this disease. They're doing pretty well. We're able to build off that. So that's the story, and this really is sort of the game plan. We have plans next year. I'll show a little bit about that to go back to this area in the Lamprey where we've done very well, and we have ambitious plans to work up in the Piscataqua. So we're kind of heading your way here, up in this vicinity of Sturgeon Creek, just downstream of the Dover outfall. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the components of the program. I talked about Jackson Lab, Dr. Ray Grizzle and Kristen Ward are my collaborators. They started looking at this system back in around 2000, and it's really kind of get some of the groundwork for the techniques we used. And what they realized was if we had more hard substrate like rocks or gravel or shell in the system, we could have a heck of a lot more oysters. Because occasionally the oysters are very productive and we get a big spawn set. And if the more bottom that we have that's hard and the oysters can set on, the better off. We can boost the populations very quickly. Because the oysters spawn, the larvae goes in the water. If it falls into the silt or the mud, it dies. If it lands on a shell or a rock or a hard place, it can start to build up. So what they did was they played around with gravel a little bit, and we came up with an idea of using this shell. Tried oyster shell. We can't get enough of it. I'll talk a little bit about that if I get a chance. But we able to get surf clam shell from big seafood processors down in Massachusetts that run off the Grand Banks. And we bring this up, and that's the shell that we make these beds for. So these guys really got this going. They do this laboratory operation where they actually seed hundreds of thousands of oysters on these shells, and we use those to put on the beds for seeding. So it's a great collaborative. There are oyster farmers in the system now, and we work together with oyster farmers. There are 6 or 7 of them. They are in this little bay area right here. So those are areas open to harvest, and they're able to set up farms now. And we are happy to work with them because farmers put a lot of oysters in the water, so there's a lot of filtration, there's a lot of food removal, and then they take the products out and they sell them. Folks eat them. It's a good, clean, sustainable, local industry, and it provides these benefits. So the oyster farmers, we're working together with them. And they've actually been able to get some money, believe it or not, through the Farm Bill to help with this restoration work. So they actually are our partners in some of this logistics that we deal with. We have another group, the Coastal Conservation Association. These are saltwater fishing folks, and they are helping in a key way, which is to recycle oyster shell that's in our restaurants. I was telling you about the problem with getting oyster shell. If you think about it, you go to a restaurant and everyone's eating a little bit of the oysters, and the shell ends up in the landfill. You can't get your hands on hundreds of tons of this stuff, which we need. So these guys came up with a process really of restaurants, and you can see the list there, and it continues to grow, where the restaurants and the wait staff get the shell, put it in a bucket, they pick it up, they bring it to a UNH composting facility, and then we wash it and scrub it and use it in our tanks. So this program is going well, and a key part about how we do our laboratory operations. And the Nature Conservancy, that's us. Besides building the reef that I'll show you about, we also have a volunteer program, and I left a few flyers here about that. So with folks who have access to a dock or a mooring, join our program. What we do is we provide a cage with oysters in it. We grow them out during a 10-week program. You keep track of growth and how well they're surviving. At the end of that program, we take those oysters and we put them on a reef. And the program has been, dare I say, kind of wildly successful here. You can see the growth. We're up to now, we had up to like more than 50 volunteer sites and over 50,000 oysters turned to the program. I left a few flyers there. If you meet that qualification, I don't get a chance to talk to you. Grab one of that. It's the Oyster Conservationist Program. And it's been a good amount of...
This might be a good time to get some volunteers. So.
Okay. Do we have folks who might be interested in this kind of thing? Okay. Let me make sure I get you one of those. What part of the system are you in?
Got a dock down at the Newburyport Yacht Club in Massachusetts.
In Massachusetts?
I don't know if we can do that because we're out of state.
Yeah, see, you'd be amazed how much regulation there is involved in putting oysters around. Unfortunately, we just got this year into rye, and I'm kind of angling to get into Maine because that's sort of the next thing, but Massachusetts is very different. So unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen anytime fast, although we'd like it to be. Anyone else? Or if you have a friend or a neighbor or something, I'll make sure you get my email and let's talk. We'll be happy to talk about it. Oh, and all those little dots, this is the extent of our program. So every one of these dots is a site, volunteer site. And you can see by the size of the dot how big they grow. We use this information to direct us where to build these things. So it's a real science. It really contributes to the restoration work. And people really like it because they're oddly competitive. It has about who grew the biggest oysters at the end of the year. We have a little get-together. It's serious bragging rights. So building these reefs, it's a construction process. So on the left you see we use a barge, and you see these bags. So the shell gets dumped. We buy it in bulk. It's a big 18-wheeler that comes. We use 3 truckloads for every acre, so it's about 150 tons. We've been using a method where we load it into these feed bags. We transport it by truck to a barge. The barge motors out to our site. It's a spud barge. You see these spuds. They go down into the bay. They anchor, and we work on a grid. So about every 50 feet they move. They swing the bag on a crane and unload it. So the shell goes in the water, and basically it's circled. And then we move to the next, and move to the next, and move to the next. And it's about 100 tons or 100 bags. They're also a cubic yard per acre. And that's been, it's not a lot of shell, but it's enough for the oysters to set on and for us to build upon. So this is a shot at a minus tide, so we usually work in about 4 feet or lower. As oysters in an intertidal don't do great in New Hampshire. If you see the weather outside today, you can get that with the ice and extreme cold. This is one, I'm worried about this reef. This is on the Lamprey River this week because of these conditions, but it's done very well. We kind of worked up on a bank that's usually about 3 feet underwater. And you can see the piles. So this is a pile of shell, and the oysters are growing right on them. These are fragments of the clamshell. These Srp clamshells, and these are baby oysters that have attached to them just naturally. They're in the system. They'll land on this shell and they'll grow. These are shells from restaurant recycling that we added to the system, and they caught oysters as well. And yeah, there's fish around these reefs. We find, especially these juvenile winter flounder, are inhabiting these reefs. It's, fish love structure, and it's a good place for them to be. And here's a pretty sciencey map of where we work this year at Squamscott. That's that trestle bridge, if you're familiar with it. And here's our grid design and our methods for putting what we have. About 250,000 oysters came in this year. And here's our results for the last 4 years of working. We started small, and it's the different parts of these things. The blue is the natural recruitment on the clamshell. This is just what gets settled naturally. The remote set is what UNH Lab contributes to it, and the middle line is what our volunteers add to it. So we've grown pretty well last year. Funding was very limited, but we still did well. We actually had our biggest natural set. And here's our total. So 6.2 acres and 1.1 million oysters added to the system. So we're very proud of this result and leveraging this going forward. It's been a lot of good press. I thank you for this evening to come in. To talk a little bit about it, but it's been in the papers. There's now an Oyster Palooza event for 2 years running on the seacoast. Newmarket has an oyster festival. The Gundle Company invites us out to talk. Folks are engaged and interested in this, as we hope they should be, and supportive of the clean estuary. We've got terrific partners. We've gotten funding from all the big federal players. We've also got state funding and support from Conservation Law Foundation. This year we got the town, the good folks of Newmarket gave us some funds. So municipality are engaged in this process. As we get into the more and more issues about wastewater treatment and what that's going to cost and the time frames and the regulations around that, there's a growing recognition that other controls, these non-point source and these stormwater controls are going to be important, and then we're not going to ever be able to keep enough nitrogen out of the estuary as we like. So once it gets in there, oysters are going to be a solution, part of the solution as we grow. Okay, this is the last real slide, and I apologize because it's real sciencey, but I use this to show we've got good numbers about how much nitrogen oysters will control. I'm not going to go through that, but basically, 0.4 or half a ton or so of nitrogen a year an acre of oysters will control. And we look at the loads in the bay, and we try to figure out where the loads are going. And if the state plan comes into effect, well, the load's going to get reduced. And if that load does get reduced, and we can build up enough oysters to filter out this system, we're aiming at somewhere on the order of 90 million oysters, which is about 200 acres of oyster reef. We're going to approach 100 next year. So we've got, you know, a marching orders. If we can do this 10 acres a year, we've been doing 5. You know, we can get to a point where there's a real ecological difference in our bay. We also can look at farms because they have very high density oysters, so we're supportive of that, and that's got its own economic engine. So that's a very interesting proposition. We can control about 15% of the nitrogen in this system, and this plays out well. And I think the last slide is just about where we're planning to work next year. I show this for funders, but we've got big plans for 5 acres of work, talked about in Newmarket, as well as Dover and the Piscataqua River. So thank you. And well, I don't know, maybe a question or something, but I don't want you to get to your meeting. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ray. Any commissioners have any questions, Ray?
I have one comment.
Sure.
Underneath the General Sullivan Bridge, there used to be quite a population of oysters. And when I was a youngster, we used to go underneath that bridge, and there was thousands of horseshoe crabs. Do you have any horseshoe crabs left down there now? Or?
Yes, we do, fortunately. Most people don't look for them on oyster reefs, however. But they are still in the system, and it's, you know, part of it. They get out into the mud flats, and it's still a central part of the ecology of the system. I don't think there's as many horseshoe crabs as we'd like to see, kind of like that with a lot of things. But it's definitely part of the system, and it just goes to show you that, you know, crabs and fish, well, they'll congregate on something with structure like that. So this oyster reef is, again, fabulous habitat. Thanks for that.
2 separate questions.
Sure.
First, out of curiosity, are you working with similar programs along the East Coast? I'm thinking of the Hudson River, and of course I have friends in Solomon's, Maryland, where there's some very successful results down there, aren't there?
Yeah.
And the other thing is, has there ever been a relationship between the I-95 corridor in terms of funding and support and your work effort?
Well, I'll start with the question about collaboration, because this is catching on a bit. It's been in the Chesapeake for quite a while, and Delaware Bay. That's the big boys of this kind of effort. And it's been a little fits and starts here. As you move further north, it hasn't really been something that's caught on. Now, we're going to be doing this work in Massachusetts this year, the Nature Conservancy and partners for the first time. So we're building on the work in New Hampshire. We're just exporting these techniques and methods to work elsewhere. And part of our team works in New York City, so there's a plan in New York City, and you've seen some of that, which is cool, and trying to get the oysters back into the harbor there. So yeah, this collaboration. Now the I-95 corridor, I'm not familiar with that, but if you can briefly describe it, I'd be interested.
The I-95 coalition takes the whole I-95 corridor from Florida all the way to Maine, and there are many different facets to that, but it becomes an extraterritorial rather than purely regional, if you will.
Okay.
And anything that affects the corridor, especially marine-related, has growing interest.
Well, that
And
sounds like something
I'm
I
not
should
even sure
Google.
where their funding streams come from, but it's another theoretical partner
Okay.
as this matures.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. I'll look at that.
There's actually a marine corridor for I-95 that's focused just on the marine aspects of that corridor.
That's MARAD
Yeah.
specifically.
Okay. I will check that out. Thank you.
Ed? Who determines the nitrogen levels are high or low?
Yeah, those are the state DES leads the efforts to do that reporting, but UNH actually does the monitoring. So there's a number of years, it's actually been almost continuously monitored since 1974 in the system. And every 3 years there's a major report. It just came out recently, this past December, of nitrogen levels in Great Bay and the various vicinities of it. So that's with the group is called PREP, Piscataqua Region Estuaries Partnership, and if you check that website out, you can get that report on the nitrogen reporting in the system.
You mentioned the sewage treatment plants in the area. Does water temperature affect the oysters if warm water gets pushed into the bay?
Yeah, they actually like it. So the oyster, we're kind of at the northern side of its range. It's the same species all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. But in fact, Great Bay has the northernmost intact reefs left in North America. But it does grow all the way up into Canada. But it likes warmer water. It grows faster. And our volunteers are showing us that you can get much better growth on these warm years. So there's a hedge against climate change here with investing in oyster reefs. They're going to do pretty well. The downside, if it gets too hot, you can get an algae blooms that can overwhelm them, and then you can have problems, and that goes across the whole board. But slow warming, they're happy. You've seen those Gulf oysters, they're like big. They grow fast. Good question, though. Great.
Any other questions? Cynthia?
How successful is Chesapeake been?
Well, yeah, there's been a lot of money spent there. I think 70 million, something like that, sticks in my head. And they've been somewhat successful, but not as successful as they'd like to be. So what they found is in some places it's done real well. Estuary-wide, it hasn't. So they have different issues than we have. They have a lot of farming and a lot of ag and a lot of fertilization runoff into that system. In some places where it's better controlled, the oysters are doing real well, and the restoration is doing really well, and they're trying to leverage off that. But you can get overwhelmed. These critters can only eat so much, and you can get overwhelmed. So that's what we see as, it's a risk. We don't want to be Chesapeake Bay here, because they really hit rock bottom. We've got the goods left here in New Hampshire, and we're trying to build off and help Mother Nature. But once you're bankrupt, it's a really hard struggle back, and unfortunately, that's what they're saying.
Okay. Thank you, Ray.
Great,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Yep.
Is that all right if I just grab my stuff?
Sure.
I'll stick around. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 3, action item. And before I start, I just want to remind everybody that it's the rules of procedure and the handbook we have says regular business voting is limited to representatives of dues-paying members, including alternates. And so that means what it says. What? I'm going to make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'd like
Oh,
to
go ahead.
establish to ensure that we have a quorum, and I'm wondering if the Vitas are voting.
Lou, you coming up?
And Carol. Yeah. Thank you, Ray.
Thanks very much, folks.
Thank you.
Bye. Is it chair over here, Carol?
Okay. Looking for a motion to approve draft minutes of September 27th, 2012.
So moved.
By Bob, seconded by Sandy. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Abstain.
Okay. And opposed?
I abstained. I wasn't here at that meeting either.
Okay. Next, to 3.2, draft minutes of November 8th, 2012. Minutes. Motion to approve?
I'll move.
By, yeah.
What's my name?
Tom. Scott, I'm sorry. Seconded by?
I'll second.
Bob, okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Next is the New Hampshire Association of Regional Planning Commission Policies and Procedure, and I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia.
Yes, Ken Orton is the chair of the New Hampshire Association, and he can't be here this evening, but the materials are not yet ready to review. So,
They're not, okay.
Yeah. So
All right.
Put this on the agenda
Table it?
in case they were ready.
Okay. Next item is the Delegate New Hampshire Coastal Program Grant Public Hearing to Policy Committee. And Cynthia.
Yes, normally at our January meeting, we have a public hearing for our coastal grant. And around Christmas time, the coastal grant program told us that there wasn't going to be any funding for a grant this year, so we canceled the public hearing.
Okay.
And then we heard from the coastal grant program that there was funding, so then we put this on the agenda. We wouldn't be able to have the public hearing here because the times didn't work with legal notice. So we put this on here, and now we've heard that we don't need a public hearing because it's going to be an extension of the existing contract.
Okay, so what does that leave us for this item?
That means that we don't need to address this item.
Tonight?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Under other business, under item 4, amendments to the Strafford Regional Planning Commission bylaws. Cynthia?
Yes, there had been a discussion by the executive committee over several meetings to look at adding a nomination committee. And we discussed this, I think, at 2 or 3 meetings. And at the January meeting, the executive committee decided that they didn't need to have a nominating committee, that things were working well the way they were. So that is not being brought forward for this discussion by the whole commission. And the second part was a discussion about the section on removal of officers. And again, the executive committee discussed that and decided that there was no reason to make any changes there. So there is nothing being brought forward by the executive committee at this point in time.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Let's see. We now come to Citizens Forum. I just want to remind everybody that it's going to be comments only, no question and answer. It's going to be limited to 3 minutes, and you have to state your name and what part of Strafford County you're from, and it's open to the public right now.
My name is Rick Everett. I'm from Dover.
We asked them to come up.
Oh, could you please come up to the microphone so we could hear the recording on it, please? Thank you.
My name's Rick Everett, and I'm from Dover. And I just want to spur your thoughts for a moment. We were forecasted here for a snowstorm for a foot of snow. And how would any of you feel if your plow driver charged you for the snow we got and plowed your driveway? Or how would you like it if a police officer came to your door and said that your son had thrown rocks at the neighbor's house and broke some windows, and you knew that your son was with your husband and he was out of town, so you knew it didn't happen? How do you feel when people deceive you? That's the comment that I have. And I'm from Dover, and when the Scenic Byway program came through Dover, tried to get stuff through Dover, we did our homework, my wife and I, and we found out what it truly was. And we broached it, we brought this forward to the city councilors who were going to vote on it. And they decided not to that night. They decided to bring it forward to the Traffic Advisory Committee. Cynthia Copeland came in to that, and she put on a presentation. And I'm embarrassed. I was totally embarrassed when she put on that presentation because she lied through her ass. Sorry to have to be
Get a gavel.
open about it, but
Get a gavel.
that was despicable. And I don't understand that.
Chair, can we have a point of order on the language?
Yeah, you can keep it down.
Am I talking too loud?
No, I'm talking about the language you're using.
An ass is
Yeah.
not acceptable?
An ass is an animal, but the way you described it was something completely different, so.
Well, if you look up the word in the dictionary, you'll find that it was very appropriate, sir. But I won't argue with you. Nonetheless, the TAC committee didn't like it either. And then she brought it forward. She brought Kyle Pimental to Dover, as well as a state official, and they both lied through you know what. I don't get it. You know, is there any accountability here? She's still here, and I don't get it. You're talking about procedures and rules and regulations for you folks, removal procedures. What's in there for removal procedures? Is it anything with teeth? Does it mean anything?
20 seconds.
You people ought to know this, and I hope you do something about it, because she's not welcome in Dover anymore.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Good evening, Mary Hubbard, 97 Spruce Lane. You know, we don't like to have to come here and tell you things like this tonight, but what Rick said about what happened in Dover with Cynthia is absolutely true. And to hear that you had an agenda item posted tonight where you were looking at changing perhaps removal procedures or changing some of your procedures, and yet your own folks have decided, gee, everything's working fine, we don't think we need to change anything. You know, part of the problem we have as members of the public with a board like this is that you're not elected, you're appointed. And so we really have no say into who sits on this board, and it seems to me that a lot of the comments or citizens forums are geared toward just the agenda items. When we have legitimate concerns, when you've got a director representing herself in a city, and she's coming in and lying to the citizens and misrepresenting to the citizens, and they're going on her information to try to make a decision. I know Dover's not the only community she's presenting to. There are other communities she's presenting to as well. And I have a real concern with her at the helm. And if you don't know these things already, we're here to tell you that. And you really do need to start listening to the members of the public who are experiencing these presentations, experiencing these misrepresentations and these lies, and having to deal with them. So I would suggest that your agenda item that you said you don't have to do anything about tonight, that you revisit that and you have some public comment on that, so that you get a really full picture, and not just you folks looking at it, but some outside input and how it's affecting the citizens of these communities. Because what you're putting forward in these programs are having almost irrevocable effects on our communities. Good night.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else?
Third time.
Third time? One more time, anybody else?
Make a motion to close the forum.
Motion's been made to close the public forum, citizens forum.
Second.
Seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, ayes have it. Okay, next item on the agenda is the chairman will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
Who made the motion?
Tony.
Okay, Tony, okay. Seconded by Tom. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.